Hello everyone, thanks for joining me. So as I'm sure all of you are aware, recently things in the PC parts market, especially for graphics cards, have just been all over the place, and it's just ridiculous what's happening. Basically, there's too much demand for especially graphics cards because of all the people who are like gaming more during the pandemic, and at the same time the pandemic made there be less of a supply of graphics cards, so it's like impossible to find the graphics card that you actually want for a reasonable price without getting absolutely fleeced. We don't even know how long it will be until you can get a regular graphics card at a price that is not ridiculous. So what I'm going to do here today is give you guys 3 different ideas of what you can do to still be able to game during these times, even though you are not able to get maybe your dream graphics card for a reasonable price. Because who wants to pay like a ridiculous price way over MSRP for a graphics card?
Okay, so the first suggestion I have for you guys is to just get a very low-end graphics card. And the only reason I'm saying this is because cards on the very low end of the spectrum are not nearly as scarce as any of the other graphics cards, as anything above that. For instance, the GT 1030 is actually being sold at a quite reasonable price currently, despite the shortage. It can usually be found for around MSRP or just slightly over, which is a lot better than can be said about pretty much any other graphics card that's better than this. Now, your first instinct might be to say, like, no way, I want to play some real games. I'm not going to be able to do that on a GT 1030 because it's a very budget card that can be found for around $100 US. But not getting ripped off for this graphics card is enough, I think, to make it worth it for those of you who are really on a budget. So if you decide to go this route, I highly recommend you check out the video I made on the GT 1030. I made the video specifically on a passive version of the card, but you can click in the top right corner if you want to check that out. Now, a lot of people, I feel like, tend to associate the GT 1030 with the infamous GT 710 because they're both part of the GT series, but it's way better than the 710. Like, they're not even comparable. The 710 can barely play anything. The 1030 can play esport titles just fine, and even older AAA titles it won't have problems with at all. It can run games like The Witcher 3 and GTA 5 with low settings and get pretty decent frame rates, especially in the case of GTA 5. I'm talking like over 60 FPS. So if you absolutely are dying to play the newest AAA games and you won't settle for the ability to do anything less, then this card is just out of the question, or something like this card is also out of the question. But if you do have a low budget, or maybe you mostly just play esport titles or just older games, so you don't need the extra power of a card that's better than this, or if you just don't mind on missing out on the new AAA games until you can get something better once the situation with the shortage improves, then getting a GT 1030 or something similar might be a very good idea. Now, on the other hand, if you are someone who, and I completely would understand this, someone who really wants to play all the newest AAA games with decent settings, then I'm going to say that your best bet is to, instead of what you might be thinking and getting a mid-range card, I think it's better to get a higher end card. While the very low end cards like the GT 1030 aren't too big a ripoff, or in some cases are even can be found at MSRP, the cards that are like at the next tier up, like just a little bit better, can be tremendous ripoffs. Like, I saw some listings for a GTX 1050 Ti, which, all things considered, is really not that much better than the GT 1030. The 1050 Ti, I saw some listings for $400 for that card, which usually can be found at around 100 pre-pandemic, I mean. Now, the reason I'm not going to fully endorse getting a card towards the higher end of the graphics card spectrum is because you're still going to get ripped off by a good amount, just not as much as if you get the lower mid-range end cards like the 1050 Ti and cards in that type of price range. So if you have a large budget, but not an endless one where you can just get like an Ampere series card, like a 3080 or something, but you still want to play the newest AAA games with higher settings, probably is going to end up being what it is, then I recommend that you get something around the higher end of the graphics card spectrum, not all the way up there, like, because if you get something like a 3080, you're gonna get fleeced, like, really badly. So that's why I think you should get something more like around the price range of a 2070 Super, which will still be a huge ripoff, honestly, because that's just how it is with the shortage, but it's not going to be well over double what its MSRP was before the pandemic, like the GTX 1050 Ti is. So, this is going to be a very expensive option for you guys. We're talking about spending maybe $800 or $900 depending on which specific model you go with. Hey, still a lot cheaper than the 3090's MSRP at least. But you might want to consider this. Perhaps the shortage can actually benefit you in one small way. Maybe you already have a graphics card, but you want a better one. If that's the case, you're in luck. Even if you have a low-end card like a 1050 Ti, that card is now worth $400 or so. Maybe not quite that much, but close. And if that's the case, then I highly recommend you sell the card that you currently have, and then put the cash you get from it towards the 2070 Super or whatever other similarly priced card you intend on getting. Of course, these are used prices that I'm mostly considering here, so if you must have a new card, you can expect to pay considerably more than if you get a used 2070 Super or something like that on eBay. Now, maybe none of the two first options sound appealing for you. Maybe you have more than enough money for just something like a GT 1030, but you don't have enough for something like a $900 RTX 2070 Super. So if that's the case, what I'm going to recommend to you is maybe consider getting a last-gen console. To be clear, I'm referring to the PS4 and Xbox One standard, not the PS3 and the 360. So between the two, personally, I would have to recommend the PS4 just because they have way better exclusives, stuff like Uncharted 4 and The Last of Us, and the price difference between the two isn't going to be a huge one that I think is really going to justify getting the Xbox One. So the good thing about this is that if you do this, you will definitely be able to play most of the new AAA games, although not all of them, maybe not stuff like Cyberpunk, while you wait for the shortage to end so you can get a graphics card that you actually want at a reasonable price. Of course, this is not going to be the case if you go the GT 1030 route, since you're not going to be able to play most new AAA games like the PS4 and Xbox One can. So for the console, it's still going to be considerably cheaper than something like a GTX 1050 Ti, and that's the price for the 1050 Ti alone, not including the rest of the PC. That being the case, this option here of getting a last-gen console, I'm going to recommend, especially to those of you who do not have PCs. Maybe you're between PCs, like you were going to build a new one right when the pandemic struck and you weren't able to since then, or maybe you're just starting to get into PC gaming now. Whatever the case may be, if you do not currently own a PC, then I'm just going to recommend that you do this for sure, because that way you won't have to buy a whole PC including the graphics card. The graphics card alone you're going to get ripped off on and have to pay for everything else. I think really you should just wait to get into PC gaming or to get a new PC if that's the case and just go with the console. I'm no big fan of consoles myself, but in this case I do think that it would be prudent to get a PS4. Of course, whether or not this is a good option really depends a ton on what type of gamer you are. If you have particular games on Steam that you want to play, this might not be the best option. Or if you're mostly interested in new AAA games, then this probably won't run them that much better than the GT 1030 anyway, but console optimization will allow them to perform still, while the GT 1030 probably wouldn't be able to run almost any new AAA games at this point. But still, if you got a PS4 or Xbox One, don't expect it to be able to run the new AAA games that are more now intended towards this generation of consoles with the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. So just be prepared that you won't get amazing frame rates with the PS4 and Xbox One.
Now, of course, for some of you, probably none of these three ideas sound all that appealing, which makes sense because none of them are really ideal. It's just what we have to do because of the graphics card shortage. But remember, if you don't want to do any of these three things, waiting is always an option. Of course, it sucks. You don't know how long you're going to be waiting, which is why I recommend, if you have the budget for it, do either of those two of the cheaper options. Either get something like a PS4 for now to hold you off, or get something around like a GT 1030 for a little bit lower budget than something like a PS4 would cost. And by doing that, then you're going to be able to game. Obviously, you're going to have to make a lot of compromises in your gaming, but you're going to be able to game and play some older AAA games as well as pretty much any new indie game. So you're still going to be able to play games if you go that route. Another route that I didn't want to mention officially as one of my three recommendations, because I can't really say I recommend it myself, but it's something that you can try and see how it goes for you, and that option is to get a streaming service. Something like Microsoft xCloud or PS Now. PS Now is available on PC, by the way. You don't actually have to have a console for that. So I'm not going to fully recommend these just because I've tried them before with slower internet connections and they just work horribly. So you have to have a very good internet connection for it to actually work well. So those are the options. That's about it for today, guys. Hope I was able to help you make a decision. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day, and I hope I see you all in the next video.